Is your mental health practice buried in the bottom of Google search results? There's a way out. Simplified SEO Consulting offers a roadmap to search engine success. As mental health professionals, they know how to help therapists attract ideal clients and build a thriving practice. Go to simplifiedseoconsulting.com/modern therapist to learn more and unlock your SEO potential this summer.
Considering a transition to private pay? Thrizer can help you transform out-of-network therapy to look and feel like an in-network experience for your clients. Your clients just pay co-insurance for sessions instead of waiting weeks for reimbursement. Thrizer covers the rest of your fees so you get paid in full upfront. Check out our special link, join.thrizer.com/modern therapist, and use the code Modern Therapists to activate $2,500 in free payments with Thrizer.
You're listening to the Modern Therapist Survival Guide, where therapists live, breathe, and practice as human beings. To support you as a whole person and a therapist, here are your hosts, Curt and Katie Vernoy.
Welcome back, Modern Therapists. This is the Modern Therapist Survival Guide. I'm Curt with Katie Vernoy, and this is the podcast for therapists about the things that we do in our practices, the things that we do in the world, and sometimes when we combine the two. Now, we have previously done a couple of episodes on walk and talk therapy, but the question is, what happens when you want to do that faster? It's not just have shorter sessions, it's actually to run during sessions, apparently, really well. So we are joined today by Sepideh Saremi, LCSW, who is here to help us talk about running therapy. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be talking with you both.
We're so glad to have you here. And you and I have had a couple of conversations and excited to share that with everyone. But before we get started, why don't you tell us, who are you and what are you putting out into the world?
So I am Sepideh Saremi, and I am here in this world to get people excited about movement therapy. So getting therapists and also the general public excited about integrating movement into psychotherapy and healing. That's what I'm about.
I love that.
One of the things that we start a lot of our episodes with is talking about misconceptions that people have or mistakes that people might make. And we don't do this as a shaming thing, but what are some of the things that you've heard that people might accuse you of or just get a wrong idea about what it is when you take therapy outside of the office?
So I love our field, but we can sometimes be very, very risk averse to the point of absurdity. So I'll get a lot, that's not ethical, or you shouldn't do that, or that's not real therapy. So when I first kind of came out and started talking in press about my practice, which is called Run, Walk, Talk, and now is a training program and certification program, I got a lot of pushback from people. But I actually also got a lot of excitement from therapists about it too. So I feel very hopeful. I think therapists want to do a good job. Like, we want to be ethical and do the right thing by our clients. And so I know that a lot of the fear around it comes from that. But it is also important for us to innovate and think about ways that we can serve our clients. So that's always the intention with what I'm doing.
What does running and walking therapy, how does it outwork? Like Curt said, we talked about walk and talk therapy. So we have a baseline there, but how does all of this work?
So whenever I hear that question, I love that question. I always want to answer two questions, which is, what does a session look like? And then what makes the work actually effective? And the way that I conceptualize Run, Walk, Talk is kind of in three different layers. The first one is movement as method. The second one is movement as modulator. And then the third one is movement as metaphor. And so I can answer those questions kind of by talking you through that. And that's kind of how I train people as well. So movement as method is all of the brass tacks of a running therapy session. So where are we doing the session? How long is the session going to be? Are we running or are we walking? Everything that's observable. And that can look really different depending on the client or the patient that you're working with. So there's a lot of flexibility in that model. And you're always thinking about, what does the client actually need? What is the goal of the session? What is the goal of the treatment at large? And how does running and walking fit into that? So it can look actually really different. And then movement as modulator is having an understanding of the nervous system and the body And then thinking about using running and walking as kind of a modulator of the nervous system. So is this a person who is kind of in sympathetic overdrive where they're kind of in flight or fight all the time? Are they super anxious? Well, maybe running or going faster is not super appropriate for them, even though that's what they want to do. Maybe it would be helpful for them to walk and slow down. Kind of the converse as well. Like, this is a person who tends to be a little too far into parasympathetic where they're kind of numbed out or depressed. Maybe faster movement would be helpful for them. And then there's movement as metaphor, which is all the stuff that's happening in the relationship between you as the therapist and your client. And then how is it showing up for the client in a metaphorical way in their life, and folding that into the treatment as well. This gets actually quite complex pretty quickly, but that's how it works in a nutshell.
How do you convey that to clients? I mean, I have to imagine that there's a lot of people who seek you out because this is what you do and might be more inclined to this anyway. But beyond just kind of like, oh, I can go get in my cardio while I'm talking with my therapist. Like, how do you explain that to your clients in kind of a really good informed consent sort of way?
Yeah, such a good question. So, one of the things that I actually emphasize with clients when they come to me is this isn't like a killing two birds with one stone where you're getting your workout at the same time as you're getting your therapy. This is us using running and walking in a way that's going to be therapeutic for you, which is going to look different from working with a personal trainer or doing like a cardio session or doing a run on your own. We're using running and walking to help you connect to yourself, to help you connect to the therapist, and to help you be supported in getting therapy. That is different from the benefits that you would get just doing like cardio by yourself. Because then you can just go on a run on your own, right? You don't need me there. You don't need a practitioner there with you. So there is a little bit of psycho ed that goes into that. And for clients most clients aren't as curious about kind of like what is happening under the hood of their therapy. But for those that are, I will explain to them kind of some of the chemistry of what's happening. You're getting a lot of endorphin release and dopamine. And when you move your body forward through space and the scenery changes, right? Like your eyes are seeing different things, the parts of your brain that are more anxiety driving calm down. So they understand that and find that really helpful.
So I'm trying to imagine, because I've not been a runner anytime recently. It was a very, very long time ago. So I'm working on old information personally. But when you're running with a client, like, are you talking, like you talked about metaphor? What do you mean by movement as metaphor? Can you share an example of what might happen in a session?
Yeah, absolutely. So typically the movement is happening at the same time as the talking. So for therapists that are hearing this, like, oh, I could never run during a session. I'm always only running at conversation pace. So I'm never running faster than I can comfortably talk at the same time, which means that it's usually a pretty slow run. It's not super speedy. And in terms of movement as metaphor, you will learn a lot about a client and kind of how they are in the world by how they negotiate the session with you on a run. You kind of jump right in. So things that I might not understand about a client for, a few weeks or even a few months, I'm seeing in their interaction with me and how they're running. So some clients get really competitive, right? They want to outrun me. Some clients will start really fast and, run out of steam. And is that happening in other places in their lives? Like they get a little too excited and then they get gassed and can't come back at the same pace. They can't pace themselves. I had one client a few years ago who the first time that we went for a walk, this was a walking client, she would end up kind of on the sand. Like we walk on a paved pedestrian path because I do beach-based sessions mostly. And she would end up in the sand. I was like, this is really interesting. Like she's very easy to push around because I was unconsciously kind of hurting her. I'm a bit of a sheepdog. So, and I let my clients, I let them know that, right? Like I have the awareness, I let them know that. And she just would end up in the sand constantly. And it was a person who really struggled with boundaries. That was happening in other places in her life. And I got to see that in session 2, right? Whereas it might have taken longer for that to come out. And she didn't have a good awareness of that either. So it was something that kind of came up and we could talk about it and work through it. And in the sessions, I would encourage her to hold her ground, right? Like, what does it feel like for her not to let me herd her around, and for her to kind of stay on the path? That's her path too. It belongs to her as well, right? We're sharing the space. So she got kind of an embodied experience of that through the work.
In the relational stuff that you do, or talking about this relational, I do have a question about potential countertransference that comes up, specifically if you and clients are at a stoplight. What are your feelings about clients who are jogging in place at the stoplight?
Well, I judge them hard. No, I'm just kidding.
That right there, for people who don't come from the running community, is ultimately kind of Sepideh's stamp of like coming from a running background right there. But
definitely. Yeah. If you're a runner and you see another runner who's doing that at the stoplight, you're like, okay, guy, we get it. Like, okay, you're a runner, we get it. But yeah, I mean, what does that mean, right? It's a really good joke, but it has some meaning too. It's like, can this person take a rest? Can they stop? The light says stop. Can you stop when the light says stop, or does your body have to keep going? And why? What's happening? What does it mean to you to take rest? So all of it potentially can become really meaningful, and you just have to pay attention. One of the hard things about doing run, walk, talk is there's so much more to track, right? It's hard enough doing our jobs when we're in an office setting, but there's so much happening. And then you add the layer of the movement, and you add the layer of the environment and potentially other people. So there's so much to track. And that's probably the biggest learning curve for therapists who are doing this work.
Feeling like your ideal clients just can't find you online? There's a better way with Simplified SEO Consulting. They're a team of mental health marketing specialists who understand the unique challenges therapists face in the digital world. Forget wasting time on confusing SEO tactics that leave you feeling frustrated and out of the loop.
Simplified SEO Consulting offers a range of proven solutions to fit your practice needs, from DIY courses that empower you to take control, to done with you coaching that provides expert guidance at every step, to their individualized done for you SEO plans that let you focus on your clients while they handle the details. Plus, they have an innovative content network program that has set practices across the country apart from the rest. When you're ready to start showing up in front of your ideal clients online, the expert team at Simplified SEO Consulting is ready for you.
Visit simplifiedseoconsulting.com/modern therapist to schedule your free consultation and find the perfect SEO plan to unlock the full potential of your practice. Don't forget to mention Modern Therapist Survival Guide podcast for $100 off your done-for-you SEO onboarding, or use code Modern Therapist for 20% off a DIY SEO course this summer.
I've run a bunch of marathons in the past. I've done marathon coaching, so not combining the two, but I know that there's a lot that I got out of talking with my running groups about just kind of some of the life lessons that end up coming up, the conversations that would just kind of naturally unfold as we spent time together. I'm wondering what kinds of things that you see consistently come up as far as kind of like, oh, these are skills that you're getting out here in this movement that you can apply to your day-to-day life. In particular, there's a lot of mindfulness things that end up coming up in just kind of going for long runs. It's just like, oh, hey, you can't win a marathon in the first mile, but you can sure lose it. And just kind of learning how to pace ourselves kinds of things. What other kinds of themes have you noticed come up with your runner or your clients?
It's such a good question. And I am always, I've done this work for a long time. I did my first ever walk with somebody in 2012, and I started running with people in 2014. I'm continually surprised at all the different things that will unfold through this way of working that maybe will take longer to do in a traditional seated setting. Certainly, metaphors around pace are really useful, metaphors around rest. Sometimes the progress comes for a client when they can tell me, I need to stop, right? Or I need to walk, or I need to pause. The kinds of clients who tend to be attracted to my practice, I work primarily with entrepreneurs, so are really hard driving, achievement oriented people, very ambitious. And so they do that to their bodies too. And part of my work is to help them create a different relationship to work and rest so that they learn like, oh, I can actually do a lot of things and not be so hard on myself. That's probably the biggest theme. And the mindfulness thing is funny. I used to joke that, and I guess I'm going to say it again now, that run, walk, talk is really just sneaky mindfulness because running is inherently, it requires mindfulness. It can also be very dissociated and kind of hypnotic running. So you do have to be careful, but you have to look where you're going. You have to breathe. There are things that are required of you when you're running that you can very easily forget in your day-to-day life. And running just becomes this beautiful reminder for you to kind of look around, look where you're going, breathe, notice where your feet are. And that is very helpful for the rest of your life.
You've talked about doing beach-based therapy or those types of things. And so I have two questions. The first one is really about confidentiality, how you talk about that with clients, how you maintain it with clients, and then the role of the environment.
So the confidentiality question is such a good question, and the number one question I get from therapists. And I handle it in my paperwork. So I cannot guarantee confidentiality if I am outside with somebody because I can't control who's going to be around and what's going to happen. And it's something that I will talk about in depth with clients before we ever go out. Most of the clients that are coming to see me and want to do outdoor sessions are more comfortable with the idea of not having confidentiality. But it's something that I'll go into quite a bit of detail. Like I'll ask them, like, are there things that, you don't want to talk about outside that maybe it'd be more appropriate for us to do a seated session or Zoom session for? And I'll give them scenarios. What if we run into someone? What if it's your friend? What if it's your boss? How do you want to handle that I'm there? Who am I in that scenario? So we talk about all of that in advance so that if and when it does happen, and sometimes it happens that they see people they know, we've already discussed it and they've got a way to handle it.
How do you handle it when you see someone you know?
Oh, great question. I usually, because I'm moving, there's nothing to do. I just kind of will wave at them, and if they do anything, I usually won't acknowledge them first. If they acknowledge me or wave at me, I'll just wave back and keep moving, and that's been fine. It's not been as disruptive to the process, really. My clients know that I live where I work, and so that's something that I will let them know too. And I'll say, like, if I see someone that I know, I'll just wave and we'll keep going. And it's socially acceptable not to stop and talk to people when it looks like you're exercising. So it's not really a problem. And then you asked a question about the environment too.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes. How the environment plays a role in the sessions.
So I think this goes back to mindfulness too. Every single time we're at the beach, it looks different. It's the same beach, but the water looks different. There's different animals around. There's different people around. So that becomes a nice metaphor. Sometimes the environment can be a little distracting. I definitely had a session a few weeks ago with a client where there was a dolphin feeding frenzy in the water. So we spent some time just watching that, which is fine. Sometimes you need a little break from the talking, I guess. And there's so much research too to support being outside. Just as human beings, we're not designed to be indoors, looking at screens or glued to chairs. So we try to take advantage of that. So we have an ecotherapy component in the work that's just kind of baked into the work. I do have therapists who are Run, Walk, Talk certified now. One of them has treadmills in her office. So she has that option. And I've talked to other therapists who they don't go outside and they only use treadmills. But if you have the option of going outside, it's really nice to be able to go outside. And even the therapist that is Run, Walk, Talk certified, she doesn't really use those treadmills unless there's terrible weather. She's based in New Hampshire, I think. So she, even in the snow, will go out and do run sessions if she can. Yeah. It's important to be outside.
Is ecotherapy clinical base that you kind of pulled from to start this? Like, I'm wondering what gave the clinical research behind you putting this all together.
So for me, it really just it came from a personal place. I coincidentally, so synchronistically, started running and started my own personal therapy at the same time before I became a therapist, and so the seed for that was planted then. So for me, I started in a very movement forward, movement focused way, and the ecotherapy was kind of a side benefit. Over time, the eco piece has gotten a little more integrated, and then when I got my own training as a therapist, the relational piece really became much more the focus of the work. So it's kind of a blending of all of them.
What is the research on running therapy? Like what's missing in the research for what you're doing in particular?
Well, the research on running therapy is really interesting. A lot of the research is on just running. So, and there's not tons and tons of it, unfortunately. The research that we do have around cardiovascular exercise and mental health in general is super good. So exercise, especially for depression, like moderate depression, is as effective as antidepressants with obviously none of the gnarly side effects that antidepressants come with for people. So we do need a lot more research. One of the issues around running therapy is that it's not defined the same way everywhere. So if you look at running therapy research that's coming out of Europe, they're not doing research with psychotherapy and running combined. When they say running therapy, the therapy is just running. So they're putting participants in groups or providing like a trainer, and a few times a week the participants will go and run. And that is actually like really effective, but there's not really research that I'm aware of where clinicians and their clients are running together. And that's what we really need. So I always say this approach is evidence informed. I don't say that it's evidence based because we don't have the clinical research to say that it's evidence based, but it is evidence informed.
If you've been considering switching to private pay and are unsure how to attract and retain clients, Thrizer can be your best resource. How? Thrizer actually helps you transform out-of-network therapy to look and feel like an in-network experience for clients with out-of-network benefits.
First, Thrizer can help clients instantly verify their out-of-network benefits, providing them complete transparency on the cost of therapy ahead of their first session. Then, just by charging your clients via Thrizer's payment platform, you can automatically submit claims for them, offload all the insurance stress onto Thrizer, and even let your clients just pay their coinsurance for sessions, similar to in-network copays, to help them afford therapy upfront and skip the long reimbursement wait. Thrizer covers the rest of your fees, so you get paid in full upfront and waits for reimbursement on your client's behalf.
They also have a super bill uploads feature, which is completely free for therapists. If you'd like to instead offer your clients a resource to manage their own super bills, they manage all claims end to end, so you or your clients don't need to deal with any of the insurance stress. Visit join.thrizer.com/modern therapist to get started and use our promo code modern therapists to start your free trial and receive waived fees for your first $2,500 in payments.
What makes run, walk, talk distinct from other kinds of running, walking therapy?
The history of running and walking therapy is really interesting. So the first person that I'm aware of that ever did a walking session was actually Freud. He did famously like a 4-hour walk with Gustav Mahler, the composer, in Amsterdam when Freud was on vacation. Like Mahler came out and met with him, and they did like this big monster gigantic session. And I think he did it with other clients as well, Freud. Running therapy was actually created in the 70s by this guy, Thaddeus Kostrobala. He wrote this book called The Joy of Running, which kicked off the jogging craze in the United States. And he started training therapists kind of on a one-on-one basis and was very insistent that they be marathon runners. So there were not really as many people. It wasn't as accessible to like every clinician, right? Not every clinician is going to become a marathon runner. I'm not a marathon runner. I'm a runner, but I'm not a marathon runner. And so that kind of the early days of running therapy were very running forward or running focused. And then in the 2010s, I guess, right around the time I started Run Walk Talk, there was also a therapist in London, and he's still doing this work, who does dynamic running therapy. That's his approach. And his approach is very mindfulness oriented. And Run Walk Talk, I would argue, is I'm not as running focused. So when clients are coming to me, the emphasis is not on teaching them to run. The emphasis is on using running therapeutically and using it to support the therapy relationship. And it's very relationally oriented compared to some of the other approaches.
So you said that you're not a marathon runner, but you are a runner. For the other folks who are training with you, are they runners? Like, do you think you have to be a runner to be able to do this?
You do not have to be a runner to be able to do this. You can just be a walker. I always joke, Run, Walk, Talk. Walk is our middle name. So you don't have to run with people. The whole point is to be able to think about this other layer of movement and use it to benefit your clients. And the trainees, the other sort of certified practitioners, we have 20 now, which is really cool. We have, including one who's in Switzerland and one who is in Australia. So we're officially global, which is really exciting.
Sure.
But they are all over the map. So we have a couple that are just walkers, and then we have people who are like ultra marathoners, triathletes, super serious athletes who have competed at really high levels. And all of us are kind of united in thinking about movement in this way and pushing it forward so that people are supported and helped in the ways that they need to be. So in that way, I'm never going to turn somebody away because they're not a long distance runner or super serious athlete. That's not the point. They can do that in other places, right? That in therapy, we're doing other stuff. So the movement is in the support of the client and the client's goals.
How would you incorporate anybody with physical limitations into this kind of therapy? That somebody who might want all of the benefits out of the movement that you're talking about, but might not be able to access some of the spaces that you're working in?
One of the things that we emphasize in Run, Walk, Talk is putting the client first and making sure that we're serving the client. And so for a client who has a disability or physical limitation, you want to get curious with them about what is available to them and then work with them to make that happen. So I have worked with clients who have physical limitations. A few years ago, I had a client who had a neurological disorder that made movement really challenging. And so in those sessions, she would hold my arm and we would walk on the sidewalk. And eventually we made our way to the beach and we would walk in the sand. But she had a very pronounced difference in her gait. And so that made her nervous to be out in public. So there's a lot of stuff going on, but you bring it into the work and then you support your client in the way that you need to. I want it to be as inclusive as possible. So I always encourage clinicians to think creatively about how can you support a client who is not going to be a runner necessarily. And this client actually did run with me a little bit, very slowly and with a limp, but we did run together. And that was very meaningful to her and very powerful because she actually identified as an athlete. And it was important to her to be able to express herself in that way.
I think about myself and I am super clumsy. I actually, in our conversation in our walking therapy, disclosed that I think I fell at one point. And so that makes me think about liability and the ways in which you try to protect yourself, protect your clients. What are your thoughts on liability, mitigating liability, all that kind of stuff?
You can buy insurance for that. And you can have conversations with your clients about that we're going outside and you might trip, you might fall. We have to look where we're going. I also tell them, like, I'm a bit of a mama bear. So I will sometimes tell you where you need to, like, I need to be closer to the street than you are, right? You're going to be on the inside part of the sidewalk as we're walking to the beach path. Or if we're at the beach path, I'm going to be in the side that are closer to the bicycles so that if a bicycle goes rogue, I get hit, not you, right? So I do kind of think about those things. In reality, like very few dangerous things have happened on sessions. And I have fallen actually. That's happened to me. Or I have gotten dizzy, and then you just deal with it in the moment, right? But yeah, you can buy insurance for that. I always joke, like, the Fast and Furious movies get made. There's insurance for everything. So people are really worried about getting sued. You want your client to be safe. Like, safety is number one, and you want to be safe. So you want to think through, where are you meeting with people? What are potential kind of like issues? I'm at the beach so much that I can kind of see when the steps are starting to get a little crumbly, right? And so I can point them out, like, hey, be careful over there, or watch your ankles on the paved path that's right up against the sand, because it crumbles, right? The ocean erodes it over time, and quite quickly, actually, with all the rains that we've been having in LA. But you can work around all of those things. Those are not things that should stop you from this work. If you want to do this work, they should not stop you. And I've thought through all of them, and it's something that's included when I train clinicians as well.
How did you handle the pandemic and the stay-at-home orders with your clients on this?
Oh man, it was so rough. And the beaches were closed. So I got on Zoom like everybody else. So I wasn't able to work in the way that's, that I love to work. And I just kind of got used to it. And I really struggled with the masking too. So it took me a while to get back to beach sessions. I didn't do them until it was okay not to be masked, because I would get kind of panicky. I couldn't breathe under the mask. So it changed the practice a lot. And then, when things were more open, then I was able to resume. But yeah, it was not good. I know for a lot of people, it's kind of like a pandemic alternative, right, to the Zooms. For me, it wasn't, because the masking I couldn't really move and masked, and I couldn't do it. But other clinicians can, and they should. It's great.
Yeah, I that's one thing that I had done, and the masking was hard, especially like my clients and I would talk about how out of breath we were because of masking while walking, and it definitely was a challenge. But I had so many clients that are like, I can't stare at a screen anymore. I need to come out and see you. And so it ended up sometimes that we were just sitting in the park with masks on, but it is interesting that each person has to kind of make their practice their own way and sort those things through. My assumption is that you probably had some clients that you were doing the run, walk, talk therapy, then you did Zoom, maybe you went back. What were the differences you saw in the work between kind of a virtual session and this movement-based session?
Well, I mean, I was really lucky in that most of the people that I saw, I'd already established a good relationship with. And so that piece was good. But there's a vitality and a dynamism that comes from a movement-based session where you're outside that you're just not going to be able to recreate in a Zoom. There's data that you get from being with a whole body as opposed to just kind of a head and shoulders that is really helpful and important. It's just more information for you to track and like try to understand what's going on with this person. So there was definitely something lost in that for me. And actually, I've gotten rid of my office. So I only am doing beach-based sessions or Zooms at this point. There's no in-office option right now. So that's been interesting to watch that too, because I have clients who I'll do some in person and then some, like, we'll do kind of a blend of that. And all of them like the in-person more. And they love being at the beach. I mean, it's the beach. You can't beat it. So So, a device or screen is never going to reproduce or replace that. You're always, as a therapist, I think, doing the best you can with what's available in terms of your schedule and the tools and your capacity and your client's capacity. But if you have the option to be in person and to be at the beach or to be outside in nature, I think it's great to do it.
Tell us about documentation. How and when do you do notes? Like, do you run back to an office someplace? Or are you furiously typing into an iPad someplace? Like, where do you do your notes?
That's a good question. I use a payment processor that has notes kind of in it, one of the HIPAA compliant ones. And I speak my notes into my phone in my car between sessions. That's the way that I handle it. And it's going great. Yeah. And I tend to, like a lot of therapists, take pretty brief notes with just what's required. And that it just looks like that. I know a lot of therapists will take notes while they do sessions. I wasn't trained that way. I was trained to do it differently. So when my client is with me, I'm just focused on the client. It would be impossible to try to take notes on a run-walk. It would not be safe. I don't know how anyone would do that. Yeah. So if your therapist is like really needs a notepad and a pen with you while you're doing therapy with people, this approach definitely wouldn't work. But you probably don't need it as much as you think you do. So it's amazing the things that you remember, how much you remember when you train your mind to think that way.
So we're getting short on time, so I want to make sure we talk about your certification program. What is Run Walk Talk certification? What's the future look like for Run Walk Talk?
So we pivoted in 2023 from my private practice to this certification program, and I've intentionally cut down on seeing clients so that I can focus on building this community of amazing practitioners. And like I said, we have 20 now. So when they get trained, we have done 2 cohorts so far, and it's been a 6-week program. I'm in the process of shifting it a little bit, so it'll probably be a little longer. We're going to do our 3rd cohort in September. So folks who are interested should go to the website and sign up for the mailing list. It's runwalktalk.com, and I'm on Instagram at runwalktalk. And what they get in that training is they get all of the stuff on how to think through. I'm teaching you how to think through all of this so that you can adapt it for your own practice. It's not a one-size-fits-all protocol or method. It's very flexible and highly adaptable to your context and your skills and background. And it's also open not just to clinicians. So primarily it's clinicians who've gone through the training, but I've had one person who's a human rights lawyer that does mediation. And we have one person who's a school counselor who is creating kind of an adventure coaching wellness program for women. Right. So I am looking at what is this person's background and do they have experience working with other humans? There's an application process. So we're filtering for that because in that training, I can't teach you how to do counseling. Right. That's not what I'm doing. But it is a really thought through. So we're going through movement as method, movement as modulator, movement as metaphor. And then as part of that, you also get a full year of monthly group consult calls. And we just did one right before this podcast, actually, where one person is a researcher and and a clinician, and she presented on running for trauma. And we talked about cases, and we talked about imposter syndrome, which is really interesting. What comes up for you if you're a clinician who's doing really different work from everybody else? So you do need community. So the pro do have the right to use that name in your marketing, and you can call yourself a certified Run Walk Talk practitioner. So you get a lot of benefits through going through the program. And I'm very community minded and know that it's hard to do different kinds of work. So I'm really all about supporting clinicians in doing that and getting as many people excited about movement and therapy as possible.
We will include links to Sepideh's Instagram, her website in our show notes. You can find those over at mtsgpodcast.com. Follow us on our social media, join our Facebook group, the Modern Therapist Group, to continue on with this conversation. And until next time, I'm Curt with Katie Vernoy and Sepideh Saremi.
Feeling stuck with SEO for your therapy practice? There's hope. Head to simplifiedseoconsulting.com/modern therapist and unlock your website's SEO potential with simplified SEO consulting. Use code Modern Therapist for a discount and mention the Modern Therapist Survival Guide podcast for a special offer on Done For You SEO this summer. Let's build your dream practice together.
Charge your full rate with confidence with Thrizer. Thrizer takes care of 100% of the insurance stress and helps your clients skip the long reimbursement wait, giving you a powerful tool to attract and retain out-of-network clients with ease. Check out our special link, join.thrizer.com/modern therapist, and use the code Modern Therapists to activate $2,500 in free payments with Thrizer.
Thank you for listening to the Modern Therapist Survival Guide. Learn more about who we are and what we do at mtsgpodcast.com. You can also join us on Facebook and Twitter. And please don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any of our episodes.